Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this another episode of One on One. We have with us tonight our guest Sarah Janabi. She is 21 years old and the author of 2 books on poetry, Miracy and More Than Pretty Words. Sarah, thank you for being with us in the studio of the MBC.
Thank you, Koya. It's a pleasure to be here.
So Sarah, poetry is a type of literature based on the interplay of words and rhythm. It is an art that normally seeks to create beauty through words. How do you define poetry and what does it represent to you?
Well, poetry for me is going home. I can say it like that. It's somewhere where you can be yourself without the feeling of being judged or having any pressure. It's somewhere where you can fully be yourself, you can express yourself. To me, that's what poetry is. Obviously, the proper definition of classical poetry is it has its stanzas and verses, it has a very specific meaning, but to me, it's just a place where I can be myself.
You have actually been a science student in college and you are currently studying commerce at tertiary level. How did you develop this passion for writing poems?
Yeah, so as you've said, I've done science in college, but I've always had this inclination towards art, be it music and writing. I discovered that I liked writing after reading a lot, actually. I used to read a lot of fiction books, Harry Potter, Percy Jackson, everything, all of the fiction that you can imagine. And I wanted one day to write my own book. But I discovered that I'm not that good at writing stories, so I just started writing just pieces of emotions and my thoughts in general. And that's how I discovered that I'm actually quite good at writing and I do like it. So that's where it started, actually.
It's sometimes said that poetry writing is a form of therapy. What is your point on that?
I completely agree. Writing, in a way, it's putting your thoughts and feelings on paper and being able to see them. It gives you a whole new perspective. So it really is a therapy. It's very underrated as a therapy, but it really is one. The fact that you can express yourself, I do completely agree that it is a therapeutic. And many actually psychologists and therapists, counselors, they really encourage people to use writing to discover themselves, because it is a form of self-discovery, asking yourself questions and actually writing it down. It's completely a form of therapy.
So Sarah, a poet normally chooses words that aim to trigger memories to the readers. The metaphors, tone, rhythm have access to the reader's senses. As a young author, how do you view that tight, intimate connection between language and emotions?
Well, when I write, I try to make my poetry and pieces of writing as visual as possible, because you want to create this image in the person's head that will trigger emotions, as you've said. So that whenever I write, I make sure that I'm using all the senses, the sight, the hearing, the touch, the smell. I use all these words, simple words, which the reader can relate to and create a picture in his head which will translate into these emotions. So I think that language is something very personal. And when I write, personally, my style of writing, I choose to write very simple words. Why? Because I want someone that maybe would have been hesitant to read poetry. When he or she reads my work, they find it easy to digest. Because in today's world, everything's moving so fast. There's so much information that people can be quite lazy to go and read and try to understand. And when you hear poetry, it's like, oh, it's very complicated. It's very structured, lots of complicated words. And that's not what I want to do. My goal when writing is to convey this emotion, this feeling, this sense of self-discovery. So yes, there's a very tight link between the language and these emotions that you try to convey.
So the simpler the better.
For me, yes, the simpler the better.
Sarah, what are the features in poetry that you believe contribute to its aesthetic and emotional reception?
The simplicity. It all goes back to that. The use of words that people can really easily digest, can easily understand. In my work, I would use metaphors such as things such as even fridges and cups and spoons and forks and things that you see in everyday life that maybe you wouldn't have thought that, okay, this can actually be put in a way that it will create a story in your head and create that feeling, that emotion that, oh, okay, I understand, I'm relating to this, it makes sense to me. So this, for me, my aesthetic is using the simpler and the less words possible to convey the most complex message.
If you could maybe explain to us what is exactly a metaphor?
So a metaphor is, as I've said, using something, an object, a concept that you are trying to mean something else with it. You're trying to explain something else. And I think that's the beauty of poetry. In general, poetry is the use of metaphors to
Exactly.
explain a concept, an idea, an expression, an emotion. And yeah, so that in general is a metaphor.
So, Sarah, you have published 2 books ranging from themes like love, pain, and even identity crisis. Is there a recurrent theme that you keep going to?
I think my focus in most of my work is probably the aspect of mental health in a way, in a subtle way, in terms of anxiety and depression, because I suffered of that for a long time. I still do. I'm still struggling with it, and I know a lot of people do struggle with it. So I think one of the main themes and the main topics that I touch is pain, self-crisis, self-identity, self-discovery. I go around these themes a lot, but I do talk a lot about love as well, because it's a very poetic concept. It's something that is easy to write because there's just so much information, there's so much emotion. So I think love and pain are 2 things that it's really easy to express in a way. And I use that a lot in both of my books. Yeah.
I guess these 2 themes also very universal. Everyone can relate
Exactly.
to
It's
these
something
2
that
themes.
it's
So, Sarah, poetry was once written according to fairly strict rules of meter and rhyme. Although these classical forms are still widely used today, modern poets frequently do away with the rules altogether. Their poems generally do not follow a certain rhyme and do not fit in actually certain order. And through your work, we've noticed you use prose poetry. You follow this style. Why did you choose this style of prose poetry?
I guess that poetry evolves with the generations, and in today's generation, this is what you see more online, and it's something that people are more accustomed to, and they would actually go towards this kind of poetry. So I think I adopted that because that's what I've seen as well. I've never studied literature or anything concerning language, so that's what I was exposed to, and in a way, it does influence your own art. What you're exposed to will influence what you write and what you post. So I think I chose this poetry that has no rules as such because it's what I was exposed to, and it's what people are more receptive to today compared to classical poetry, as you've said.
What is prose poetry to you?
Prose poetry, for me, it's one exactly without rules. So you're more free to discover and to explore different styles of writing. You can, sometimes what I write, it rhymes, sometimes it doesn't rhyme, sometimes it's a long text, sometimes it can be one sentence. So it really gives you this space to explore more than the very strict poetry that we usually would consider poetry.
You've mentioned that you didn't study literature,
No.
but do you hope to do that one day?
Maybe for now I'm studying business and entrepreneurship at Curtin. I'm on my 2nd year. Definitely writing is something that I would want to learn a bit more in a structured way. But for now I have other priorities, but hopefully in the future, yes.
Okay. And Sarah, you've published your first book in 2018.
Yes.
It's titled Miracy. What does miracy signify?
Miracy is actually a Greek word, which means to leave part of yourself in your work, to take a part of your soul and leave it in your artistic work. So while looking for titles, after I finished my manuscript, actually, I found this word. I'm like, oh, okay, this kind of matches what I've written, and it's a pretty title, so that's why I chose this word, miracy. So, yeah.
So miracy is therefore about leaving a part of yourself
Exactly.
in your work.
Exactly.
What did you leave in that book, and what did you receive from miracy?
Miracy was a book that contained all the poems, well, not all, part of the poems which I had written since I was a teen, since I was 15. So everything that I've written over the years, I had all of this in front of me. And actually what inspired me to write Miracy was Rupi Kaur's book, Milk and Honey. I didn't know that actually poetry books existed. And when I saw her book, I was like, why don't I try to do that? I have enough work to compile into a book, so let me do that. So I think what I've left in Miracy was my whole teenagehood. And it was something for teenagers to relate to. And what I've got back from that book was actually really good feedback, and I'm really grateful for that, that this book helped so many teens discover themselves in a way and discover their emotions which they couldn't express, which were written on paper in this book. And that was like the main response out of this book was, thank you for putting it down and helping us get through this teenagehood. So yes.
It was indeed a beautiful book,
Thank you
and
so
the
much.
words were so much like everyone could relate to that,
I tried my
especially
best.
teenagers. But Sarah, what was your creative process while writing Miracy?
Well, I think any creative process, it really comes out of inspiration. And me, I believe that you don't go looking for inspiration, it comes to you. And I was actually quite patient with myself. I just let the words come, I let the emotions come. And as soon as they do, I just write it down. The technical process behind writing the book was much more complicated, finding somewhere to print, somewhere to publish, somewhere to market. Putting it together took me quite some time, actually. It took me more than 6 months. I had completed the book in 2017, published it in 2018. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the table of contents of Miracy is divided into 6 sections, and it is in the format of a poem.
Yeah.
How do you interpret that poem, and why did you opt for this style?
Whenever I write anything or anything that I do in general, I try to do something different. So when I was thinking of my table of contents, I was like, okay, I write poems. Why don't I make my table of contents be one poem which represents the whole book in general? So the table of contents was quite actually the flow of the book, which shows the growth process of a teen. That was like mostly my emotions, my thoughts, and what I thought that many people related to. So that table of contents was actually meant to show this transition from a young girl to feeling this love and heartbreak and depression and pain, and actually growing out of it and seeing the reality of the world. So that was why my table of contents was in the form of a poem.
Which poem from Miracy did you find it more difficult to write, and it also means a lot to you?
Well, there was one poem about depression, which I've turned into a spoken word after that. I think that one was really, it wasn't difficult to write, but very emotionally charged, because it was something that I really did feel, and depression to me was that, it was that piece of text. So yeah, that text was definitely probably the most, how to say, emotional one to write.
Recite us a few lines, please.
Oh no. So it starts by saying, I tried explaining depression to a friend, and I tried to make her understand, but she said that depression was just being sad, and depression is not being sad. It's much more than that. So yeah, it goes along those lines that actually depression is not sad, and it's something very hard for a lot of people to understand, but I try to pass the message in this poem. So yes.
Indeed, it's a very important message
Yes,
as well.
yes, I believe so.
You've also recently launched your new book of More Than Pretty Words.
Exactly.
Tell us more about it.
So this book, I started it actually just after Miracy. I mean, I wanted to see the response to Miracy, and after that, when I saw that it was picking up, I was like, okay, I need a second one as soon as possible. So I tried to compile some of my different pieces after that. And the difference in this book is just that it's not just the small pieces of poetry like in Miracy. It has one poem and a few pages of more text kind of writing, which represents the poem, which is related to the poem and those topics. But this book, the difference with this one is that it has no chapters. It has no particular theme. In this book, I try to recreate the mind and emotions in general. And our minds and emotion is not in a specific order. There are no themes. So this is what I really wanted to represent in this book, and thus the title, More Than Pretty Words being poetry. This is more than just poetry. So this is, yeah, for this
Yes,
book.
exactly. I was coming to that. In Miracy, the themes and the narrative disperse a certain sense of chaos, while in More Than Pretty Words, the same notion of fragmentation and disorder is illustrated through the structure of the book. Through this choice of narrative and structure, did you actually intend to showcase the instability of human
Yes.
emotions and thoughts?
Yes, exactly. Actually, that was exactly my message in this book, is that as humans, we don't come in a specific order. We don't come with our thoughts like very segmented and very specific. Our minds are a mess, and we have to accept that this is something that makes us human. And this is what I tried to do in this book. It is exactly to show this side of humanity. So yes.
So, what are the different literary devices that you use in your poems?
Honestly, I don't know anything about proper literature. I never studied it. What I write is literally what I feel.
It's just about pouring your
It just comes out. It
emotions.
comes out on
Yes.
paper, and obviously I will try to make it look pretty enough and have this kind of flow. But in terms of very specific techniques, I don't use any of
You
those.
don't really follow
No,
that,
I don't
right?
even know those actually. No, I don't.
There's actually a concept called self actualization, where it refers to a person's desires towards self fulfillment and the willingness to embrace the unknown and to really be unapologetic of who you are. Do you feel that More Than Pretty Words took you on a journey towards self actualization?
Yes, yes. Honestly, I have this thing that I want to achieve as much as I can at a very young age. And this book was definitely part of it. It is an achievement for me, and I do have to accept that, okay, I've managed to do a second book, and this does contribute, obviously, to this self-actualization. The first book as well. And anything that I try to do right now, it's aimed towards that. I do have that very strong drive to do as much as I can, as young as I can. So yes.
And how do you think that this book can also help other teenagers or other people as well?
I think in terms of the content of this book, it is a book that will make you think about yourself and make you feel, hopefully, uh, through my words, through my poems. My goal with this book was to make you relate. That's my goal with all of my writing, actually. I want you to feel, I want you to be unafraid to feel things that maybe society tells you not to feel. And this is my message through my book. In terms of publishing a book or writing or doing anything in terms of your artist or your passion in general, um, it's it's something that you really should follow without fear, unapologetically, as you've said. Do what you love and do it very, very confidently.
How did you actually decide to really write this book after Miracy?
Actually, the response to Miracy that really pushed me to do the second one, because before Miracy, I was terrified. When publishing the first book, I was like, I have no idea if people are going to buy it. I don't know if they're going to like it. I'm so young, maybe people will think I don't know what I'm doing, you know. It's just,
Yes.
who is she? She's just trying to write. And like, it was really an experience. It was an adventure and a very scary one, because I was so young. I had no idea. I had no idea of the business world, even actually how to sell a book, how to market a book, what to do to for people to see it. And thank God, like, I was really, really happy with the response, and that's what really pushed me to do a second one. I don't think if I had gotten a good response, I don't think I might have not been motivated to do a second one.
Well, we hope there's a third one too soon.
Hopefully, hopefully.
Sarah, you've written both Miracy, More Than Pretty Words, but how is the voice in Miracy different to the one in More Than Pretty Words?
I guess the main difference that you can see is that Miracy is a book written by a teenager, and it's quite obvious. More Than Pretty Words, despite the only 2 to 3 year gap between the 2 years, I think this period of time in one's life, it's where you learn and unlearn a lot of things, and it's where you discover who you really are, or you're in that journey of discovering who you really are. So More Than Pretty Words is definitely a representation of that phase. Compared to Miracy was like, how do you say, a representation of teenagehood in general, from 15 to 18. So it's obvious. As soon as you read it, you can tell, okay, a teenager wrote Miracy, but an adult wrote More Than Pretty Words. And hopefully next books will be even more representing the age and the phase that I am in.
And in More Than Pretty Words, we've noticed that you use a lot of question marks.
Yes.
Why is that so?
It's exactly to create that curiosity towards yourself. I want my readers to think about themselves, because in today's world we are so busy, and even myself, I'm not speaking, even myself, I don't have time to sit and think about myself and think, who am I? Who am I? What am I doing? What do I like? What do I don't like? What are my values? Why am I doing what I'm doing? So this was one of the main reasons there's a lot of questions in question marks in More Than Pretty Words, is because I want the readers to think about themselves, because I know that we don't have time to. And through this book, if you're sitting and reading it, you have to force yourself to think about yourself. So that was the main aim.
So self-discovery.
Self-discovery.
That's the goal, exactly.
Exactly.
Yes.
That's how
Share
you
with us some of the responses you've got concerning your new book, which has been launched, I guess, 2 weeks ago?
3 weeks ago, yeah. Well, the response that made me really the happiest, which I've gotten from a few people, is I can't put the book down as soon as I've started reading it. And that made me so, so happy, because I was really scared for the second book as well, because I had expectations upon myself, and I kept thinking that, okay, so my readers also do have an expectation that this book has to be better than the first one. It has to be different. It has to have more things. So definitely the response that made me the happiest was I couldn't put it down. It's definitely a book that's much more mature than the first one. So yeah, it's still, I've just launched it, so I'm still waiting to see what other people have to say about it.
If there are positive feedbacks, I'm sure there are criticism as well. How do you deal with that?
Well, I think as an artist, you kind of prepare yourself to realize that not everyone is going to like your work, and you have to accept that. And as a person as well, some people just won't like you, they won't like what you do, and you just have to take it like, okay, some people like it, some people don't. It's really, I don't think too much about that, because it's normal. You know, as an artist, you get used to it. You get used to hearing stuff that, okay, I've gotten things like, who does she think she is? Does she think she's a J.K. Rowling or something? But you're like, it's okay, you know what? It's fine. You don't like my work, it's okay. To each his preference, and it's fine.
Exactly. And Sarah, since poetry is actually meant to be sung or read aloud, what is the relationship between your speaking voice and your writing voice?
Actually, I do spoken word. I do perform my poetry for some occasions, and it did start actually in college. The only difference between a spoken word poetry and a written poetry is that sometimes the spoken word has to have a bit more rhymes than the written one. Sometimes the written one, you can write a whole text without rhymes and it will still sound like poetry, and it's just fine. But when you're speaking poetry, when you're doing a slam or a spoken word, definitely you will have to have the intonation and some of the words here and there which kind of rhyme to have that kind of flow, because it does have this musical feel, so it does have to have that flow. That's the only difference. But in terms of content, almost the same thing. Yeah.
But when you're writing, do you actually have any particular audience in your mind, an ideal reader maybe?
For now, when I'm writing right now, my target reader would be especially teenagers to young adults. That's when I write, I try to put myself in their place, because I've been in their place, and I try to write what I think they can't express. So that's like probably like 13 plus, 13, I mean, even after 21, 22, but 13 plus, yeah.
Okay, and you also do a bit of songwriting.
Yeah.
Explain to us, how is poetry writing and songwriting different?
It's a bit like the slam, actually. When you write a song, the only difference is the rhymes, because obviously in a song you do have to have this, for it to be catchy, you have to have the rhyming words especially at the end of the sentence. So that's the only difference, really. But the process, the creative process behind it is exactly the same. It's the emotion. At the end of the day, any art that you're making, it's the emotion that comes out of it. So,
how did you develop that interest in songwriting?
Well, since I was a kid, actually, I really loved music. I used to play the piano, the guitar, and discovered that I liked singing when I was in primary. So it all came from there. It just, there's a really strong passion for music. I haven't done any course or any structured learning, but I have this hobby and passion for music. So it all came from there. It all came from when I was a very little kid and had my first little keyboard and started playing on that. So that developed into what it is now.
We are actually drawing towards the end of this episode, but before that, Sarah, you've already written 2 books. So what's next now?
Well, now I'm finishing my studies. I do have an idea for a 3rd book in mind, but haven't had time to kickstart that now. So yeah, I do work with my parents in our family business, our cafe. So this is priority for now, my studies and my art, which is always on the side. Yeah, so that's it.
And any advice you would like to share with our youngsters to encourage them maybe to follow their passion like you're doing?
I would say just don't be afraid of being who you are in terms of your art, your creativity. And it doesn't have to be just in terms of art. It can be in whatever you do, be it business, whatever you're studying, whatever you're not studying, and you want to pursue that, you want to pursue your dream. In this world, nothing is impossible, so just go for it without thinking twice.
Exactly, nothing is impossible.
Exactly.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It was
Thank
a pleasure
you.
to have you with us
Likewise.
tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, we have now come to the end of this episode. Thank you so much for your time. We hope to catch you next week at the same time, same channel for another episode of One on One.